Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. We refer to him affectionately as Lambo because this dude is super high speed. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Wes Lambert.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you got some good breakfast, some coffee, and are ready for some good Security Onion content. Again, I am Wes Lambert, also known as Lambo, and this presentation is called Watching the Watchers, and let me actually put it on the screen here. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how we can work to defend our visibility, being that our visibility as Security Onion. Just thinking about ways that we can protect our grid and ensure its proper operation and that kind of thing. So just talking in the vein of visibility. Just thinking kind of at the basic level, when we think about visibility, really just thinking about, just being able to see in general, right? Just having an unobstructed view, right? Just like this kind, yep. Should be on, yep. All right. Just like this gentleman, Ed Bassmaster here, looking at this beautiful vehicle, right? He's got an unobstructed view into this beautiful thing right here. So, visibility, when we think about it, right, enables our defense, right? Being able to see, being able to understand what's going on in our network, being able to understand the type of communication, right, things that are going on. Without having that visibility, do we know if there are attackers in our networks? Do we know if they're, if we're, undergoing anything like that? Where are they, right? I mean, we don't know without visibility. We have to have that to be able to understand what's going on in the network in the first place, let alone understand if anything bad is happening. So in the case of Security Onion, the primary watchers, you would say, or maybe our visibility that we have, are going to be that of beats, right? We're talking about the host data. We might be shipping logs or collecting logs from an application using FileBeat or Windows Event Logs with WinLogBeat. Similarly with OS Query. With Playbook, we have visibility into some characteristics of those logs, right? We have detections. We have ways to look for abnormal activity. We have that kind of visibility. With Stenographer, we have full packet capture, right? We're able to see kind of the full conversation and that kind of thing. Strelka, we have files, right? We're looking at certain characteristics or metadata of the files, and we're able to make certain determinations on files that are extracted from the network. We have that kind of visibility. And then with Suricata and Zeek, Suricata, we have that metadata, right? And we have the NIDS capability. The same with Zeek, we have metadata about these things going on in our network. We have that type of visibility. And this is just a diagram. It's not too bad. But again, showing just at the network level, our certain visibility that we have there, the host level, the visibility that we have there, and then kind of going from there, going into some characteristics of those files with Strelka and Yara. And then also being able to later hunt and stack on that data, having a central repository and having a way to look at that data and, either through hunting or stacking or alerting, having a particular form of visibility into our network, right? So as defenders, that's very important to be able to understand at these various levels things that are going on and to be able to analyze them appropriately. Now, when we talk about visibility and we talk about all of these things that we have at our disposal, how do we defend against attackers potentially affecting that visibility in one way or another? We'll talk about this a little bit in the talk, some preventive measures you can take, kind of some basic measures, some monitoring, and some other things that you can do to look at this or address this. But again, it's like, how long would it take before we actually realized our visibility was impacted, right? Would we know if something changed? Would we know if an attacker was doing something bad to affect our visibility? We really need to be able to detect that and respond to that, potentially redirect some of that activity, maybe guide the attacker towards a certain path, and increase the overall cost, right? Like make it just not really feasible or not amenable, right? I mean, that's the main goal, right? So some basic practices. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is not, I'm not talking about stigging your boxes or doing anything like that. but some very basic practices we can do, right? The first one being turn on MFA for SOC. Since last Security Onion conference, we do have MFA available for the analyst login, right? So if you're logging into Security Onion console, please do enable MFA and only allow access to ports as necessary, right? I think this is kind of a basic one. This is always preached, right? Least privilege kind of thing. But it's very important that you're not just opening up, a huge subnet or, quad zero, whatever. Use SSH keys. I know some people do this. I don't think the majority do though. SSH keys are great, as an alternative form of authentication, right? Instead of just a username and password, since you would need that to authenticate. And a really important one that we try to really drill into folks is not exposing the Security Onion node to the internet unless it is required by the role, right? Certainly not a manager, right? We don't want to have all of that capability and all that visibility potentially be impacted, so easily or from such a broad attack surface, right? So we also talk about detection, right? So detection is usually implemented as a set of rules, whether it be HIDS rules like OSSEC or something similar, or NIDS rules like Suricata, right, where you would write snort rules, that kind of thing, or Sigma or Yara or even Zeek scripts. These are all forms of looking at the data and detecting if something is amiss, right, based on that rule. So that is another way to protect this visibility, right, to alert us of something bad, right? But what about things like configuration failures, right? If you don't hear anything bad happening, is anything bad happening? Would you know? Would you know if an analyst or an engineer put in a rule or mistyped some YAML, and then the service is now not functioning? You're no longer logging data, or you're no longer seeing those alerts. Would you know? So it's very important to consider using things like version control, right? Like maybe Git or something similar for certain configuration files, and really have some process in place to be able to monitor those things, whether it be looking at the local system logs for potential errors, or just, again, having that version control. It's very important to be aware that these are some things that could definitely be impactful to your visibility. And I think these are often overlooked, I think, or people don't think about it until it's too late and it's already happening, right? And maybe not even from a malicious perspective, but just from everyday management. We see this a lot with support and professional services type things, where people might have mistyped something or put a rule in that was maybe a little too verbose, right? So it could definitely be impactful. Aside from that, I'm sure we've all had service failures before. Particular services, maybe like the NIDS service or the host-based data. Maybe something fails and you don't hear about it. Did it really fail? Yes, it failed, right? And now you're not getting data. Your visibility is impacted. These are things that we need to monitor for to protect that visibility. I mean, these might seem basic, but I think time and time again, folks should be reminded, or can be reminded, of things like this that can be very simple, right? Being able to monitor for these types of activities. And we can do this with things like Grafana or Playbook, right? There's lots of ways that we can do this. Upstream failures are going to be another thing, right? So upstream failures can absolutely impact visibility. When I talk about that, I mean like the NIC, right? If you have a bad NIC, or if your NIC just can't handle the load, right? You might have no packets, you might have packet loss, you might have all sorts of weird stuff going on. Same thing with cabling, even span ports and taps, right? I mean, how many times has anyone ever run into an issue where the network team, suddenly there's a new segment, or there's no segment left on the span, right? Anybody had that happen? Or a tap? Yep. Okay, it's definitely a possibility and something that you should be thinking about, because you don't want to be getting into an incident and trying to investigate and realizing that you're not getting what you thought you were getting. The same thing with running security or just security tools in the cloud in general, right? If you're performing VPC mirroring or you're looking at other data, cloud security groups, right? This kind of firewall changes. If you're not letting the mirrored traffic through appropriately, you could be missing stuff. You might not be getting what you think you're getting. So these are all impactful to our visibility overall. So here's an example, a very simple example. This is something that you can use in Playbook. This is something that Zeek already generates. It's a very simple kind of way to monitor the traffic for Zeek. And we actually have an accompanying video for Grafana as well on YouTube. But this just looks at the Zeek notice logs. And by default, the capture loss script for Zeek will tell you if there's no traffic or very little traffic on an interface. This is just a very simple way to take that notice and bubble it up to an actual alert, right? So that now it's in the console. We have more eyes on it, right? We might not be looking at the Zeek notices every day. We might not even know they exist. This is a way to get ahead of that and protect your visibility. And here is an example, is that rule fires. We do have an alert generated in Security and in Console in the alerts pane. And we can see that there's something wrong with our interface there. You might want to go check that out, right? And now we can do that maybe within an hour or two. We might have just seen the alert. We might have been to lunch or something. Instead of having to run into a situation where we're in an incident or we're doing, like a red team exercise or a pen test or something like that, and we get caught with our pants down, right? I mean, nobody wants that to happen, right? So protect our visibility. We can do that with things like this. Aside from that, we can also implement deception, right? So we can have ways to make something appear that is not, right? We might want to lure, confuse, increase the cost to the adversary, right? We want to make it more difficult. We want to, at least make them work for it, right? Or get scared and run off. So we're going to pour a little honey on it, Bay. All right. We're going to put some honey on it. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about honey credentials. Okay. Or honey creds, right? So if you're not aware of honey credentials, typically it's just a set of fake credentials. I suppose it could be legitimate, right, in some instance, but disabled. But the main goal is to alert whenever these credentials are used, right? Because these should not be used by a regular user, should not be used under normal conditions. Typically, we would want to spread these throughout, the environment in places where we think an attacker or an adversary might pick them up and try to use them. Things where, places where we might think they might pillage and go look for fun stuff. These can be injected into memory. In this case, we are just looking at really just placing a file on a network share or on a workstation or a server, right? And these can also be SSH keys, right, or tokens. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a username and password combination. So here's an example of honey credentials right here. So the attacker might gain access to an employee workstation, finds the honey credentials, kind of rooting around on an attached network share or something like that. And then they attempt to log in to the target device, maybe that they're assumed the credentials are used for, or otherwise, and an alarm is generated, right? Well, at least that's the intention, is an alarm is generated to an external system. We're notified, we're able to investigate, and we know, at that point in time that, that the adversary could have been, at least here, right, where these credentials were stored. We're able to track that activity at least. And we're made aware of their presence, right? So again, one way we might do that is by dropping a file, including fake credentials in this case, maybe something to like a security and in console or something like that, or maybe a dummy security and in console, I don't know. But that's one way to do this, right? So we've got the username and password in there, and we've got an IP address to where an attacker, might give them a little hint where to go. And something we can do to detect this kind of activity is create a play within Playbook, right? So we create this play, and what we're looking for is just from the Kratos logs here. Kratos is our identity provider for Security Onion. It helps with our identity operations. And we're looking at these particular types of audit logs to see if this username, or not even the password really, just the username, has been attempted to log in with, right? And the great thing here is that we don't even have to create an account in Kratos or anything like that. We can just, throw a random name at it, and the log will generate this message. And we'll be able to tell that someone has attempted to use these credentials. It won't work, of course, but we will be alerted to the presence of the attacker, right? We'll see that directly in Security Onion console because of that play. It's going to generate that last alert rule, and it's going to run, and it's going to see that from Kratos, we're able to identify that those credentials were used. And then we can go off in that particular direction, as I mentioned, where we think, or where we place them, right? And go from there. Similarly, we can leverage intrusion detection honeypots. Chris Sanders and Josh Brower talked about this at the last Security Onion conference at an excellent presentation about IDH and about using it for deception, right, and detection. So the real purpose, for these honeypots are really to mimic that legitimate system, right? And typically these are going to be placed inside the network alongside similar assets, right? Because you don't want it to look so out of the ordinary that it's completely ridiculous from the attacker perspective. You want it to blend in somewhat. And typically this is going to be, a low to medium interaction honeypot, right? They're not really going to do much on this. They're not going to be necessarily logging in. We want to use this for detection purposes, right? See if they even accessed it or tried to log in. And the main thing is that this honeypot is monitored, right? We're actually monitoring the activity. We're not collecting data, then going back and reviewing it. It's actually monitored, and then it bubbles up to us, the analyst, and we're able to review that quickly. So I'm going to talk about the IDH node a little bit. It was presented again at the last Security Onion conference. It's now cleanly integrated into Security Onion, so you can just run through setup, add that IDH node, and you're ready to go. Right? So you just connect the node, start attracting adversaries, and then we alert on their presence and make them cry, right? Because that's what we do with Security Onion. So let's talk about a variant of the IDH node, about the Security Onion Decoy node. Would you like to deploy a Decoy Security Onion instance, something that looks and smells like a Security Onion, but isn't? We can confuse attackers, right? Maybe they think they're attacking the actual Security Onion instance, an actual Security Onion manager. By doing this, we can redirect that activity, right, based on the intent of the adversary. I mean, they may reverse course, they may retreat altogether, or they may probe further still. Either way, we've already turned the lights on, right? We've already lit up the scene, right? So here we go. Here's an example, just a very, very simple. The attacker connects to the Security Onion Decoy, and hey, what's up? We got you, bruh. All right. For real, though. It looks like a legitimate Security Onion console, but it's not. Right? We can leverage this to our advantage, thinking, routing the attacker or, influencing their perception, their actions in this way. Now, this is a custom Open Canary skin based on the IDH node work that Josh put together and Chris together collaborated on. And you can see here we've just got some basic YAML config. This is, again, a custom template and everything that I will probably be releasing a link to later. But it's fairly straightforward. This is just an example of how you might modify that in the pillar for any Open Canary config in general. And then with the IDH node, there are plays enabled when we install the IDH node. So for things like SSH, HTTP, MySQL, right, all the various services, we have plays automatically enabled. So that means that we have detections ready to go once it's added. And what that means is that you can see we have this playbook rule here. So with this, we'll get an alert whenever the HTTP server or the security in Decoy is accessed. Similarly, we'll get an alert whenever the HTTP login, whenever they attempt to log in to the server. You'll more than likely get the access before the login, obviously, since they're going to be hitting that. But either way, you're turning the lights on, right? You're tipping the advantage to your side, right? The attacker is likely unaware that this is not a legitimate security in a node. They may keep trying, they might want to tap into that visibility that we're trying to protect. So we can see an alert here. Now from the playbook rules, we'll see we've got an HTTP access from the attacker at the security in Decoy node, and we can get some other different details there, such as the source IP, right? We'll be able to see which particular IP address, which internal device the attacker was connecting from, which is pretty nice. But aside from that, let's talk about another strategy we can use, or another tool, and that's honey commands. So what a honey command is, it's an alias or a wrapper around actual legitimate commands, where we'll wrap in our own desired activity into the actual execution of the command, right? And what this results in is the attacker not necessarily experiencing any difference in behavior from their perspective. So if they're trying to pillage a server, or they're trying to do some recon, right, and trying to figure out where to go, if they're trying to pivot and they're trying to pull some tools down, this is a great way to alert us of that. And really, this could be implemented on a security ending node, where if you're concerned that it's kind of the last hop and the box has actually been accessed, this could be a way to alert on that, right? Among other things. So here's an example of an attacker gaining access to the server. And what we have here is the attacker trying to pull down, or just call in attackertools.com. I think I missed the URI on that one. But we can see that wget is aliased to not just wget, right? It's aliased to a curl command. And what this could be some internal webhook. This could be some external service, right? It could be a lot of things. And then we're redirecting the output to dev null, right? So, we're suppressing that basically. So we're running the wget command after that, along with any other parameters that the attacker wants to run. And here's an example. If we wanted to send that to Slack, right? An out-of-band notification. We might not want to send it to our security ending console if it's potentially impacted, if our visibility could potentially be impacted. And for persistence for us, if we wanted to actually add this for a single user, we could add it to the bash RC for the particular user, or we could add it to etc profile.d, right, for all users, just depending on what particular commands that we choose might be, appropriate for that. Here's just a general overview of the Slack payload that we might send. This is just the alert that gets generated in Slack, right? You can see that I've just added it to the general channel there. Just specified honey alert as kind of as a username, and then specified some other details, right? With the wget, we're just referencing that command was run. That's why this is being triggered. Someone is logged into the security ending server, And we're also just doing a quick who am I to actually see who ran the command, right? Which user is the attacker running as? And then again, on which actual host, right? If we have multiple boxes, we might want to know that. And then a cool emoji. So we run the command. The attacker runs a command, right? Pulls down the evil tools. Zip. Looks no different. It's there, right? It works. It's fine. But then we receive a Slack notification, right? So the attacker has gone and done, what they're doing. They're doing their thing. Unbeknownst to them, we know they're doing their thing, right? So we are aware. It's probably pretty critical, probably got hair standing up right now. But it's another way to have a last stand at protecting your visibility, right? Not necessarily alerting to the current system, but externally, because you may not be able to. So, in summary, this is just a quick overview. This is not intended to be wholly accurate, but just some examples of the degree of impact of our visibility, right? For example, starting with those config failures, all the way down to host access, and some things we might monitor for or use for monitoring, as well as some of the other honey things on the side that we might want to do or use to attract and alert upon to protect our visibility, right? Protect our infrastructure. Redirect them in a particular direction. So, in summary, we just need to be aware of the failure paths and the attack paths for our visibility infrastructure, right? We need to be thinking about that because it'll be too late when you're not, right? It might be too late. So we want to instrument those deception and detections wherever able. And again, as always, increase the cost to the adversary, right? That is all that I have. Thank you all. Any questions? Yep.
What's your strategy for dealing with locations where you have a sensor that is online, but whatever is at that location hardly ever sends data. Like maybe you may get a few packets here and there.
Right.
Maybe enough that protocol analyzer is going to generate events on.
Right.
How do you prevent something like that from continually causing flapping on alerts?
Yeah, I think it just depends, right? I mean, trying to build a baseline of what's normal for that and trying to really hone in on kind of the variability there. I think it's probably going to be the best bet. And then, obviously like the service monitoring and configuration monitoring and stuff like that might be important. And then again, you can always leverage the, the honey stuff as kind of a last stand kind of thing on the box itself, right? So.
Right. So do you do any type of analytics, like trying to do trending to see on Tuesdays we never see any packets from the sensor?
Right. So Grafana is a great way to look at that, right? So you can see the historical average and you can see between certain time points and kind of a sampling of that data. Yep. Anyone else? All right. Yep. Yep. Yeah, just not really exposing like any of that really directly to the internet, right? You don't want SSH or any of that directly accessible, right? You want to focus on maybe like a VPN solution or something like that. Anyone else? Yep.
Have you had any experiences in the real world where you've seen this actually work? Like, do you have any real world experience, like seeing?
Right. So I myself, right? It's just kind of personal development and that kind of thing. But yeah. But I think from Chris and Josh have kind of done a great job explaining. I know Chris has done a lot of research with the low interaction honeypots, right? and that kind of thing. But I myself have not necessarily. Yeah. Yeah. No, it'd be great to see some actual like statistics or on how that's being used, if that can be shared. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you guys.